Emberton, please. Will you come this way, please?
George Farrow, retired jobbing gardener, cycling home down a dark country lane one June evening after a visit to his local, was knocked down and killed by a speeding car which failed to stop. A passing witness identified the car as a grey-green Mercedes and the driver as Henry Burnett, a local businessman. Burnett has pleaded not guilty to causing death by dangerous driving. The trial resumes with the defence counsel questioning Burnett's private secretary, Mrs. Vera Emberton.
Personal secretary for 7 years and worked with him closely. So presumably you know him quite well.
Yes,
How would you describe your relations with him?
Well, they're very friendly, of course.
Do you mean as a personal friend?
Well, I wouldn't put it quite so high, but, well, as my employer, we get on very well. Well, I wouldn't have lasted so long if we didn't.
Would you say that he was a demanding employer?
Very.
Does he ever ask you to do things that might be considered more than your job? More than you're paid to do?
Oh, frequently. Well, he works all hours and expects me to do the same.
You don't mind?
I consider it my job, and I'm very well paid, actually.
So we can say that you have a high regard for Mr. Burnett?
Yes, I have.
Now, Miss Emberton, on June 14th of this year, we're told that you were working in the office with Mr. Burnett until 6 o'clock. Could you go on from there, please?
Well, Mr. Burnett had suddenly decided to go to his villa in Switzerland. And that meant a lot of extra memos and letters to do. So I said something like, if you want me to work half the night, you'll have to feed me as well. So we took the unfinished work and went to his home and finished it there with sandwiches and a drink. Well, then Mr. Burnett found he wanted the draft balance sheet, but that was at Mr. Danville's. So he telephoned him and said we'd be over later, which I didn't much like because that meant I'd be even later home, and I thought possibly my husband might come back that night. He was in London at some meeting or other. So Mr. Burnett said we'd use the Mercedes because I needed the cobwebs blowing away, and he went to get it out of the garage. And then he came back and I was ready, and we went out together and found Neville had just come back and banged the door of his car into Mr. Burnett's car.
Did you see the damage?
Oh, yes, definitely. It was dented and scratched by Neville's car.
But you did not see the actual incident?
No, my lord.
Then you can only testify as to what you saw, not as to what caused the accident.
Very well, my lord.
What happened next, Mrs. Emberton?
Well, there were a few words, and then we left. And we arrived at Mr. Danville's, so we were there less than an hour. It would have been more, but I wanted to get home because of my husband. And indeed, when we did get to my home, I found my husband had come back.
And what time did you arrive home?
It was 10 or nearly. It takes about 25 minutes from Mr. Danville's.
And then what?
Well, I asked Mr. Burnett to come in and say hello to Jack.
I see. Now, Mrs. Emberton, I'm sure you'll realise how important this is. How long did Mr. Burnett remain with you and your husband in your cottage that night?
Well, I asked if he'd like a cup of tea, and we had that and chatted. It was 10:30.
You're quite sure of that? It was 10:30?
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mrs. Emberton. No further questions.
Thank you.
You're very close to Mr. Burnett, aren't you, Mrs. Emberton?
Well, yes, if you mean by that.
I mean that you do things for him beyond what is normally required of a secretary.
I'm paid for it.
And what are you paid?
3,500 and bonuses.
That is a good salary for a secretary. But as you imply, you're a good deal more. An amanuensis, a personal assistant, general handmaid.
I don't know what you mean by that.
I mean that you do a great deal for him. And he relies on you very greatly, not only in running his office, but generally smoothing things for him.
Well, yes, I think that's true.
And you obviously have a very high regard for him.
Yes, I have.
So that if he asked you to do something that was, shall we say, beyond the line of duty, and you could do it, you would.
Yes.
You told the court that when you left his house to go with him to Mr. Danville's, you saw a scratch on the front near side wing of Mr. Burnett's car.
That is what I saw.
I suggest you didn't. I suggest that the accused asked you to say this in support of his story.
You can suggest what you like, but that is what I saw.
I'm also going to suggest that when Mr. Burnett took you to your home, if he came in, it was only for a minute or two, and he left at once, and not after half an hour.
Mr. Burnett did not leave the cottage until 10:30. You can ask my husband.
Well, thank you for your advice, Mrs. Emberton. I intend to. No further questions?
I have no further questions, my lord.
You may stand down.
Thank you.
I'd like to call Mr. Robert Danville, please.
Robert George Winston Danville.
And your address, Mr. Danville?
Courthouse, Ash Green, Fulchester.
And what is your relation to the accused, Mr. Burnett?
I am a director of Burnett Components Limited and associated with a number of his other interests.
Now, I'd like you to turn your memory to the evening of June 14th of this year, if you will. Now, I believe that at or about 8:30 on that evening, Mr. Burnett paid a call on you.
That is so.
Now, can you recall the circumstances of this visit?
Well, yes, I can. Actually, it was near 9:15. He turned up in one of his very splendid cars with Vera.
It is only necessary to give simple answers to the questions, Mr. Danville.
I beg your lordship's pardon. He turned up in his Mercedes with Vera, his personal assistant, Mrs. Emberton. Well, quite simply, we spent about half an hour discussing the business he came to see me about, and then they went off.
You say about half an hour. Could you be more exact than that?
Well, yes, I suppose in actual fact it was nearer 3/4. I remember I wanted to show them a couple of pictures I'd just bought, of which I was rather proud. Then Mrs. Emberton became restive, and I saw them both out at about 9:30.
You saw them off personally, did you?
Indeed I did. I hope I know my manners.
Will you tell us what happened as you saw them off?
Well, nothing in particular. They just went. I wished Henry and Mr. Burnett a pleasant holiday in Switzerland.
You didn't notice anything?
Oh, I see what you mean. Yes. Well, Henry got into the car, and I saw Mrs. Emberton into the passenger seat. As I shut the door and stood back, I noticed a slight scratch on the front wing. In fact, I made a joke about it, but I don't think he was too pleased. And then they drove off.
Thank you, Mr. Danville.
Mr. Danville, no one but you and, of course, Mrs. Emberton and the accused actually saw the car, closely, I mean, when it stood in the driveway of your house.
Well, I can't account for prowlers, but yes, that is the case.
So we have only your word and theirs that there was this damage to the car at the time.
Oh, quite. Merely our words.
You have been associated with the accused in business for some time.
Some 10 years, and socially, of course.
And how did this association come about?
Well, I'm a banker. Mr. Burnett wanted some financial advice about the flotation of Burnett Components as a public company, actually. And he consulted my bank, and I went on the new board as its representative.
And what bank was this?
Kerry & Wayne Limited.
Of which you were a director?
Yes.
Are you still?
No, I retired in 1970.
But remained with Burnett Components?
Yes.
Presumably in a different capacity?
Well, yes, I look after all the financial matters.
What is your salary as financial director?
I presume that is the business of the court?
You must answer the question, Mr. Danville.
$8,500 a year.
Do you have any other sources of income?
I sell a picture from time to time.
Or capital?
I have a few shares in Burnett's, not many, alas.
So, in fact, you are dependent on your directorship of Burnett Components for a living?
Yes. But I do work for my money, you know. Quite hard.
This question of your resignation from Kerry Wayne.
Yes, I thought we'd get on to that.
Yes, we do get on to it, Mr. Danville. You didn't exactly resign, did you?
Well, I did.
Weren't you rather forced to?
Not at all. My health wasn't too good, and I liked to pull my weight.
Well, may I recall the circumstances? They were extremely public. Is it not a fact that in March 1970 you sold a block of shares you owned personally in a company called Martello Enterprises?
Yes.
And this company, Martello Enterprises, which was a client of your bank, went into liquidation the following week?
Yes, but that sort of thing does happen. I was lucky to get out.
And there was an inquiry by the Department for Trade and Industry, and you were accused of profiting from privileged inside information.
Yes, but it was
in
quite
selling
untrue.
your shares before they crashed.
Yes, but I didn't know the situation was in Martello at the time.
And so you said, under oath, at the inquiry. But the Commission decided you were lying.
Yes, well, it was conducted disgracefully. The chairman...
Lying, Mr. Danville. They said you were a liar.
Well, I wasn't.
As a result of which your fellow directors in the bank insisted on your resignation.
Not at all. I left of my own free will. It's the kind of gesture that you have to make in the city. Nobody really believed I was guilty.
And this resignation left you entirely dependent on the goodwill of Mr. Burnett for a living.
Well, he certainly didn't believe that I was a crook.
No? Or was it that he found a compromised but able man useful to him in his many business affairs?
Oh, nonsense.
One he could get rid of at any time if he didn't do exactly what he was told.
Come.
Including committing perjury for him in this court.
My lord, I do object. I'm not committing perjury. I saw the damage as I described it. It was there.
Mr. Golding, you make a great point of this damage, alleged damage to the accused car caused by his son. You have striven to show that everyone who claims to have seen the damage before the death of Mr. Farrow to be lying.
Yes, my lord.
Is this necessary? Far be it from me to dictate or even influence your line of questioning, but could not both accidents have occurred in the order stated? This would not invalidate the prosecution's case.
Oh, that is true, my lord.
And it would save time going into the witnesses' backgrounds.
As your lordship pleases. No further questions.
Occupation, Mr. Emberton.
I'm a teacher.
What is your relation to the accused?
Well, my wife works for him. She's his secretary.
Now, I'd like you to turn your mind to the evening of June 14th of this year. Do you recall the evening?
Yes.
Now, we've been told that you had been on a visit to London and returned on that evening. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, what time did you return?
10 to 10.
Can you fix that exactly?
Well, I caught the 9:15 from Fulchester Central. It gets to Cosley at 1:45. The cottage is a 5-minute walk.
Thank you. Now, would you describe in your own words what happened then?
When?
Well, from 10 minutes to 10, the time of your arrival.
Oh, I made myself some bread and cheese and some warm milk. I was doing that when my wife came in with Mr. Burnett.
So that we can say that they arrived, 5 minutes after you'd had?
5 minutes.
At approximately 5 minutes to 10, then. What happened then?
My wife made some tea. We all had some and sat talking, and then he got up and left.
How long did you sit talking?
Half an hour.
You're quite sure of that? It was a full half hour, was it?
Oh, yes, the clock went. We have a climbing clock in the kitchen. He looked at it and said something about, "Good Lord, is that right?" and looked at his watch. It was 10:30.
And so he got up, said goodbye, and he went?
Yes, in his car.
Did you see him out?
No, my wife did. I was feeling tired.
So you didn't actually see his car?
No.
Thank you, Mr. Emberton.
Mr. Emberton, you say you just returned from London.
Yes.
Would you tell us more about this visit to London? What was its purpose? How long were you away?
It was a congress.
Of what?
The Swami Ananda Guru.
I'm sorry?
The Science of Divine Light. It was a 3-day congress.
I'm afraid we're not all acquainted with this divine light, did you say? Is this a new religion?
It's the only religion. The Guru is the present incarnation of Christ.
I see. And you are an adherent of this movement?
Yes.
Now, this congress, you say, lasted 3 days. That's Monday to Wednesday.
No, Tuesday to Thursday. Oh, I came back a day early when I got the chance of a lift back to Fulchester.
Oh, so that your return a day early was unexpected. By your wife, I mean.
Yes, I suppose so.
But your wife has said, Mr. Emberton, that she was expecting you.
If I may, my lord, Mrs. Emberton said she thought her husband might possibly come back that night. I have a note here to that
Yes,
effect.
I have a note. I thought possibly my husband might come home that night.
Thank you, my lord. So your wife was, shall we say, half surprised to see you that night?
Yes.
And what time did you arrive in Fulchester?
9:15. I just caught the bus as it was leaving.
And this brought you to Cosley at 9:45, and from there you say you had a 5-minute walk.
Yes.
You live in a cottage just outside Cosley, I believe.
Yes.
Did you loiter on the way, go into a pub?
No, I don't drink.
Very well. And a very few moments after you got home, your wife arrived with Mr. Burnett.
Yes.
And you tell us that he then stayed 35 minutes before leaving.
Yes.
You realise the significance of this point, Mr. Emberton?
Oh, yes.
It means he claims he was still with you at the time when we assert he was driving his car down Bottom Lane, some 15 miles away, and killed a cyclist by running him down.
Yes.
And only you and your wife are able to corroborate that statement, that he was still and didn't leave your cottage until 10:30.
I suppose so.
Oh, it is so, Mr. Emberton. And I'm going to suggest to you that you are both lying. I suggest that Mr. Burnett, the accused, merely came into your cottage for a moment or two and had a word with you and left no more than 5 minutes after he had arrived.
No, he did not.
And I suggest furthermore that you are supporting his story and your wife's because it is very much in your interest to do so. You say you are a painter and an art teacher.
Yes.
And where do you teach?
Well, I used to teach at the Fulchester Secondary School.
Used to?
Well, I work mainly at home now on my own painting.
Is it a lucrative occupation?
Not yet.
So, in fact, you are dependent on your wife's salary?
Yes.
Well, I put it to you then it was very much in your interest to support Mr. Burnett's story of his being with you in your cottage until 10:30 on the night of June the 14th.
No.
It was not in your interest?
It was true what I said.
You say you're a member of this new religion, the science of divine light.
Yes.
A devout adherent?
It's what I believe in.
I imagine, like most religions, it encourages the telling of the truth.
It is the truth.
And you would not be fit to belong to it if you told a lie.
No,
You would not be worthy of communion with your guru, your new Christ, if you were a liar.
It's the truth.
I beg your pardon, my lord. Mr. Emberton, I'd like to take you back for a moment in your evidence. You say you got a lift back from London that put you down at the Fulchester Central bus station at 9:15.
Yes.
And you then caught the 9:15 bus out of Fulchester to Cosley.
Yes.
Would anyone have noticed you on this bus? The conductor or other passengers?
Oh, I don't know. No.
You say you weren't noticed?
No.
That is hardly surprising, because no 9:15 bus left Fulchester that night for Cosley. My lord, I would like to put this newspaper up as an exhibit. It is a copy of the Fulchester Gazette dated Friday, June the 15th, 1973, and it contains a short paragraph, which, with your permission, I'll read to the jury. It is headed, "Religion Stops Bus." A quarrel between the conductor and passenger at Fulchester Central bus station last night ended with 30 passengers being deprived of the 9:15 bus to Amthorpe. The conductor, a Sikh, alleged that a passenger called him a dirty heathen in a towel. The conductor and driver refused to take out the bus till the passenger apologized, and the passenger, whose name was given as Mr. Patrick O'Healy, refused and knocked off the conductor's turban. The stranded passengers had to wait until the next bus at 9:45 in order to get to their homes. A strong protest is being made by the local representative, Fulchester Anti-Racial, etc., etc.
Let that be Exhibit 3. Mr. Golding.
My lord, Mr. Emberton, we have it then that you could not have been on the 9:15 because there was no such bus. So that was a clear lie, was it not?
Well,
was it a lie?
Yes.
Which bus did you take? The one before it?
No.
Well, there are only two more after the 9:15. That is the 9:45 and the 10:15, which is the last bus. Was it the 9:45?
No, the 10:15.
So you could not have arrived at your cottage until 10 to 11. Isn't that so?
No.
By which time the accused, Mr. Burnett, had already left, hadn't he? Mr. Burnett had already gone, isn't that so?
No, he was there all right. And so was she, and not in the downstairs room either. Oh, God, they are not going to make me into a liar. Not that, too. Oh, the dirty bear. He's lying, my lord.
The accused will be silent.
I have no further questions.
Mr. Dealey, do you wish further to examine your witness?
My lord, in the circumstance, I think nothing will be gained by further questioning of this witness. But I should like your lordship's permission to recall the accused.
Yes, I will grant that. Mr. Emberton, before dismissing you, I must remind you that you have, on your own confession, lied in this court on oath. You have committed perjury. And I must warn you that proceedings may be taken against you in that regard. You may go.
Mr. Burnett, will you return to the witness box, please?
I would remind you, Mr. Burnett, that you are still under oath?
Yes.
You stated in your evidence, Mr. Burnett, that you arrived with Mrs. Emberton at her cottage some minutes before 10 p.m. and found Mr. Emberton already there.
Yes, I'd like to explain
You heard evidence
about...
from Mr. Emberton which showed that he could not have been there when you said.
Yes.
Your statement then was untrue.
Yes.
Then why did you make it?
My lord, if you only knew what I was going
Address
through.
the
This was
jury.
Yes, my lord. I was being victimized. I'm innocent, but the police they concocted this vile conspiracy against me. I agree, Yes, I lost my head, and I'm sorry. I asked Emberton to support his wife's statement, and he agreed, that's all. Everything else I've said here is true.
You have also heard Mr. Emberton say that when he did arrive home, at nearly 11 o'clock, he found you still at the cottage.
Yes.
Now, is that true?
No, it is not true. The man's ill. He's jealous of his wife, of me, of...
You do appreciate that if you accept Mr. Emberton's story, then it must exonerate you from being responsible for the death of Mr. Farrow.
I am fully aware of that. But it's not true. I left the Emberton house when I said at 10:30, and I went home. I was not involved in any accident.
Now, is that the truth?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Burnett. That is all.
Do you wish to re-examine, Mr. Gulling?
No, my lord.
You may return to the dock.
Thank you.
Members of the jury, both the prosecution and defence counsels have rightly dwelt exclusively on the one piece of direct evidence offered in this case, that of Mr. Driscoll, who identified the driver of the car as the accused, and the car as the car that caused the death of Mr. Farrow. Is he or is he not a reliable witness? The charge stands or falls on this. You have heard him give evidence. You have seen his first very positive assertions, somewhat qualified by cross-examination. Of his sincerity, I imagine you can have no doubt. Of his sureness of observation, you must judge. And if you have any doubts, they must be to the benefit of the accused. Well, having said that, I shall now turn to a matter that must be uppermost in your minds. The witness, Emberton, has stated, under cross-examination, that the accused was in his house, his cottage, at 11 p.m. on the evening in question. This, if true, would completely exonerate the accused. Why then did he not seize upon this statement, accept it? Was it because, as he says, it was not true? Or was it because, if he accepted it, he would be laying himself open to another charge, not pursuable in criminal law, but almost equally ruinous to his reputation? The accused has freely committed perjury in another area. Is he perhaps doing so again, preferring to rest on a precarious alibi rather than on one which is true but uncomfortable? You will retire and consider your verdict.
All stand. The accused will remain standing. Members of the jury, will your foreman please stand? Just answer this question, yes or no. Have you reached a verdict upon which you are all agreed?
Yes.
Do you find the accused Henry Burnett guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
Is that the verdict of you all?
Yes.
Have you prepared a record of the prisoner's execution?
Next week, a chance for you to join another jury in assessing the facts when our cameras return to the Crown Court.